to Ezra, Nehemiah, and then you'll come to the book of Esther. We're going to go to chapter number 4 of that story. Remember, what we're doing in this series, we're not taking a comprehensive look. I mean, obviously, if I were to preach about the full story of Esther, this could be something that would span the entire, like a 4 or 5 message series, because really the story breaks down in such a way that you could really focus on every different aspect of the story. But what we're doing, we're looking at the pinnacle moments in the life of people. Like in the story of Samson, for example. Remember, we looked at the pinnacle moment where Samson really, his faith was restored as his strength was restored. But we didn't look at all of the long story leading up to that. We're looking at the high points of these great heroes of the Bible's life. So we're in the book of Esther, and I want to begin by reading just a few verses, and then we'll look at much more as this begins to unfold. So Esther chapter number 4, beginning at verse 1. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square where he was in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. So he gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her, and that he might command her to go to the king and make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. Now let me stop right there. This is going to be a story that requires a little bit of background, doesn't it? We're introduced right off the bat. We hear names of people and situations, and we step into something that is obviously very emotionally charged. When you read about someone putting on sackcloth, that just means like they just put like bags over themselves and they've put ashes on their face. It's like they're in a state of mourning. Sometimes when there was a great national tragedy or some other historical, just really damaging thing that's ready to take place, people would clothe themselves in sackcloth and they put ashes as a way so that everybody that saw them would know that they were in a state of deep, deep mourning. So we kind of step right into the scene, don't we? And we see someone that's really deeply distressed, and we see a lot of terrible things that are beginning to unfold. And we're introduced to a queen, and we're introduced to a man by the name of Mordecai, and we hear in passing a man by the name of Haman. So we're going to take kind of a step back and kind of look at this story from the beginning and find out the application points for us today, because there are many along the way. You know, as I have begun this series of heroes, I thank God that He has provided stories like Noah, like Samson, like Esther, like David, to see how God took ordinary people and did extraordinary things with them. I mean, he took a little shepherd boy in David and made him king of all of Israel. We're going to find a young lady of Jewish descent by the name of Esther, and by the providence of God, she's going to be elevated to position of queen over all the land. These were ordinary, regular, everyday people just like you, that God did some extraordinary things in their lives. So we need to look at this and learn these principles and learn these stories and be reminded of how God uses people that are willing to be used by Him. So the first point that I want you to get today is this: finding God during the daily grind. We all go through the daily grind, don't we? You know, Monday's coming in just a few hours from now, and many of us will jump right back into what we call the daily grind. Get up in the morning, have breakfast, go to work. We work all day. Or maybe you do something different. Maybe your day's a little different, but irregardless of that, there is a routine we get into, whether you're young or old, and that is our daily grind. We're grinding out another day, getting through another week, getting through another month. It happens to all of us. In this story, in the context of this, there is a king who ruled over an incredible empire, a vast, large empire. His kingdom was very, very expansive, and he had power that was really beyond measure. There was no way to tell what powers the king had. He had a beautiful queen, but one day his queen, by the name of Vashti, or Vashti, I think that's it, Vashti, V-A-S-H-T-I, Vashti. Queen Vashti refused to listen to one of the king's decrees and one of his commands. She thought in her mind, well, I'm the queen, I can do whatever I want. She ignored the decree of the king. Upset by the audacity of this queen, the king asked his advisors, what should I do about this? I've given a decree. Queen Vashti has refused to comply to my decree. As such, she was removed from the throne, stripped of all power, stripped of her title, stripped of everything. She became a common person, just like that, by a word of the king. There were concerns that if word got out among the people that all of the wives in the kingdom would begin to rebel, that none of the wives would keep listening to their husbands. That was the word that came. I'm not making this up. That's the word that came down. If it happens to the king, it can happen to any of us. So let's get a lid on this right now. So the king decided, based on the word of his advisors, that he was going to strip the queen of all of her power. She was no longer the queen. Everything was taken from her. Everything. She was no longer royalty. She no longer got to live in the palace. She no longer had the pleasures of servants and things like that. Everything that she knew was gone. Vashti was removed from her royal place. But then the question arose, well, who would be queen? I mean, you know, there's a vacuum now. The queen has just instantly been taken away as though she died, and that left a big vacuum. I mean, a king has to have a queen. So what are we going to do? How can we find a queen that is suitable for the king? Well, they had a brilliant idea, and you're not going to believe that. If this weren't in the Bible, I don't even think that I would believe this is true. Here was the plan. Let's have a beauty pageant. I kid you not. Let's have a beauty pageant. Whoever wins the beauty pageant, she will be the most beautiful and the most gifted and the most articulate and the most well-rounded, perfect woman in all the land. So we'll have a Miss America contest in our own country, and whoever wins, she becomes the queen. And believe it or not, everybody sat around the table, nodded their heads, and said, okay, I'm for you. Let's do that. Let's have a beauty pageant. So all the word goes across the land that they're going to have this thing, and whoever wins is going to become the queen. I mean, it really is kind of a surreal, weird kind of story as you step back from it and you just read it for face value of what's going on. You just think, my goodness, this is really weird. Who would ever appoint a queen this way? And yet they did. So all of the most beautiful women from all of the region were brought to the palace so that a suitable queen could be selected and find favor in the eyes of the king. One such woman stood out far above and beyond all of the rest of them. As they did whatever the contest entailed, and I don't know, we aren't given the details of that, but we know that Esther stood out from all of the other women in the region. There was no comparison. So I don't know what to take from that. Obviously, she was extremely beautiful. She had to just be breathtakingly beautiful. But I think that she had a lot of other skills and attributes that played into that as well. She was certainly no dummy. I mean, she was a bright, articulate, very measured person, a very wise woman, but also very beautiful. So whatever it was in addition to her beauty, it captured everyone's attention so that there was no question mark at all. That is the woman. There can't be anyone else but her. She has to be the one. Now, Esther had been an orphan. She was taken in by an uncle or a cousin by the name of Mordecai. Mordecai advised Esther, and he told her something along the way, somewhere along the way in her life, that it would be better for her if she kept her Jewish heritage secret. We're in a strange land. We're in a land that is not our land. Esther, it will be better for you. You'll have more opportunity. You'll be able to go further. You'll be able to do a lot better things if you just keep it under wraps. Don't ever tell anyone that you are a Jew. So she listened to him. She trusted Mordecai. Mordecai always had her best interest, I believe, at heart. So Esther was chosen and she becomes queen, and she served the king very well. In fact, we find that she was almost an advisor. He trusted her opinion. That tells me she was a very smart and measured and wise woman. So Esther was not only beautiful, she had a lot of other skills and attributes that she brought to the table. And with Mordecai's help, there was even one time that Esther as queen alerted the king to an assassination attempt on his life. Well, that gets anybody's attention. And he began to understand that however Esther learned this, she had an ear to the ground of the people. And she knew things that even the king and his advisors didn't know. So the king trusted her. He knew that Esther was something very special and that she was the perfect wife for him. So we find Esther just going through the ins and outs of everyday life. She's going through what we call the daily grind. And from a regular person in a regular family, nothing special except she was a very beautiful woman, she was elevated by the hand of God from a regular woman to a beauty pageant to the palace. She is now queen over all the land. Number two, sometimes we find based on this story that God will allow your discomfort in order to reveal His will. Let me say that again. God will sometimes allow your discomfort in order to reveal His will in your life. 5 years pass. Esther has been queen for 5 years now. She has learned all the ins and outs of being a queen, like what fork do I use? When do I stand up? When do I sit down? What servants are mine? What do I do to keep the king happy? What servants can I trust? Which ones do I not trust? Which ones can I speak to? Which ones do I need to be tight-lipped with? Which ones serve me best? Which ones don't? Where can I go? When can I go? All the ins and outs. You know, there's a lot of pressure that comes with any title. But Esther, over the course of 5 years, she has learned this. You know, when I think about the story of Esther, I can't help but think of Lady Diana. Remember that she came from a relatively common family and became a princess and had the storybook wedding that every child dreams of. I mean, it was like a Disney movie playing out. I mean, with horse-drawn carriages and a train on her dress. It was like, it seemed like it went a mile long. And everything was just exactly the way it was supposed to be, down to the letter. She had a big learning curve. She had to learn all the ins and outs, and I think that pressure takes a terrible toll on your life, that you feel like you can't even go out to get an ice cream cone without having an entourage of people and getting it on your calendar and getting approval by the proper people, and they'll make the arrangements so they can put a press release out that the queen is not pregnant, she just wanted ice cream. It's exhausting being royalty. There's tremendous pressure, but Esther somehow figured it out. She went about over 5 years, and these are years of peace and prosperity and luxury in her life. She never wanted for anything. Anything the queen wants, instantly somebody would attend to that and get that and fill that need. She's the queen. She's the second most important person in all of the realm. She speaks, and 50 maidservants come running to do whatever her bidding is. She lifts her voice, and everybody gets silent in the room. Nobody would dare talk over the queen. She says a word, and it's done. For 5 years, Esther enjoys the prerequisites of her royal position. And that leads me to this point, that when Esther was raised up as queen over a Persian empire, she had no idea what God had in store for her. She had no idea that during year 3 of the drama that was about to unfold in year number 5. You see, there was a vile, vile man by the name of Haman. Haman was the king's right-hand man. If anyone in the kingdom had more access to the king than even the queen, it would be Haman. Haman had his ear. Esther had his heart. Haman had his ear. And Haman was always there. He was kind of what we would call the power behind the throne. He was the guy whispering in the ear of the king. You've seen the picture when presidents or kings sit at a table somewhere and someone just walks up behind them. And then they just step back like this. And all the while, the world leader is just processing what he was just told or she was just told. And they're thinking in their mind, is this something I need to get up and leave? I remember we're at the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Do you believe that? It's right around the corner. Horrific time. But can you still remember the time that George W. Bush was sitting in the elementary classroom and he had a room full of little school children sitting in front of him and he was doing story time, and his chief advisor came walking into the room very quickly. He bent over and he started whispering into the ear of the president. And I remember sitting in my living room and I saw the president look up. And nobody else, it was as though nobody else was in that room. And when he looked up and you saw the look on his face, you knew something was terribly wrong. And he was processing the entire time he was in that room about what was going on. But he continued what he was doing. He didn't want to send out any sort of panic of any kind. He finished what he was doing, and they hurriedly got him out of that room, out of that school, and back to Air Force One and back to Washington, D.C. The word was, our nation's under attack. Advisors have tremendous access and tremendous power behind the great authorities of the world. So Haman was that guy. He was rotten to the core. He was an evil man, but he had the attention of the most powerful man in all of the known world. Here's what he had determined that should happen behind the scenes. He had the king put out a decree across the whole land that they would rid the entire kingdom of all of the Jewish people. Every one of them. All of them. Across the board, we're going to exterminate all of the Jewish people. Word had gotten back to Esther's cousin, Mordecai. Mordecai approached Esther to see if she would approach the king. Now, she knew what happened to Vashti. She knew what happened to the last queen who dared to give the king bad news or not listen to him. She was stripped of everything, and Esther doesn't want that to happen. She listens, but she begins to fear the worst about this request, and she wasn't totally sure what to do. Nevertheless, she executed a plan to save her people from destruction. The story of Esther in the Old Testament easily matches up to any storybook or epic movie. It's like a Marvel movie rolling out right now, except we don't have Iron Man and Wonder Woman. We have Esther going against the arch villain, Mordecai, and we see the other players at work, or Haman in other words. Mordecai is behind the scenes with stirring up the people, making sure they know everything that's going on. So we have Queen Esther, the champion. We have Mordecai helping her behind the scenes. We have the arch villain, Haman, and it's all unfolding right for everyone to see. One of the most memorable phrases in this story comes from Mordecai. He says this, "Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this." Now, here's what he's saying. He's saying God might have you feeling uncomfortable right now so that God has your attention, so that God can reveal His will to your life. You see, sometimes we're just going about the everyday rigors of life. We're going through the daily grind. But God will allow a time of uncertainty and a time of fear and a time of anxiety and a time of distress to come into our lives for a season so that God has our undivided attention and can reveal His will to us. Have you ever noticed that when things are going really, really well in your life, that sometimes it's hard for God to get your attention? I've seen that in my own life. Have you? I've felt that in my own life, that when things are just going great, I become a little more self-reliant than I should. And I think, wow, look at what I've done. Man, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I've done this. I've done that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to accomplish this. I, me. And then sometimes you have to think, but where is God in the mix of my life right now? So sometimes we're just going through it, and God allows discomfort, and God allows this discomfort to come into our life in order that He can reveal His will to us. Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. This could be true for any of us. Replace royal dignity with something else, perhaps as a pastor or as at your job in the city, this family, this friend, this person, this ministry position, whatever it is. Listen, here's something interesting, a factoid, if you will, about the book of Esther. Not one time does it ever mention God. Did you know that? In the entire book of Esther, God is never referenced and God is never mentioned. We see His hand And we hear it in the words that are used. When he says, maybe you're here for just such a time as this, Mordecai is saying God's up to something. God is going to save his people. But we don't get any mention of God in the entire book of Esther. But we see God as an unseen force at work. This would have been an important point in the Jewish community hearing this story. It was a reminder that even though they were spread out and overrun by a much stronger empire, that God still cared deeply for them, and that the people in various ways were there to help protect one another. That utter destruction would certainly be avoided because of God's hand. Esther is put in a very, very dire situation. Confronting a king could mean losing everything that she had grown to love and appreciate in her life. Her position, her money, her servants, her prestige, everything that she could ever hope for. Esther is asked to stick her neck out for her people. She made a bold move, especially knowing what happened to Queen Vashti, her dethroned predecessor. She risked her life, her royal position, her comfort, her riches, her lavish life in the palace. She risked everything for the greater purpose. Her final words before she approaches the king was this: "If I die, then I die." What boldness. You see, in her mind, she had already determined that this could go very, very poorly for me. But she had come to a point, after wrestling with all the decisions, with all the things that could happen, of everything that could take place, Esther, in her mind, has come to that point where she says, if I die, then I die. At least I'm going to die doing something right. You know, sometimes God may put you in a position at work, at school, at church, in your neighborhood, wherever you might be. God may put you in a position so that you would be the one to say what needs to be said. Or you're the one that needs to stand up when everyone else just sits down. God has called his people to stand against injustice in this world. We are to stand for those, to be a voice for those that have no voice. You know, one of the reasons why we are so passionately pro-life in our church is, number one, because we believe all life is precious, that God is the giver of life, and life is worthy to be defended. But the other reason for that is based on the principle that you and I need to be the voice for those that have no voice. Those that cannot cry out and say, don't do that to me. We are called by God to be their voice in this world. We stand against the injustices of this world, and we do so in love, but also with boldness. We are not to back down. We stay our ground. We stay the course. We are to thwart evil whenever we have the opportunity to do so. Commenting on this story, Hope College religion professor Lynn Japinga writes this. She said, "We are all called to find creative ways to speak truth to power, to fight against injustice, and to make a difference." I don't know about you, but that kind of sums up what I'd like to do with my life. I like to stand up against evil, to fight against injustice in the world. I want to be able to speak truth to power in a loving way, but I also want to make a difference in my world. I don't want to be just a passerby as the world goes by. I want to make a difference in my world. Who knows We may have come to the places where we are in our life right now today for just such a time as this. In other words, God has you where you are for a reason. God has you exactly where you are for a purpose. You need to discover that purpose. And if you don't, God may let you become uncomfortable so that He can reveal His will to you. Number 3. As you go through your daily grind, as life might get a little bit uncomfortable for you, the third thing, you have to place faith over fear to do the right thing at the right time. You have to be willing to put faith over fear in order to do the right thing at the right time. Now, that's easy to say. It's not so easy to do. It's easy to stand here and say, hey, just have faith over fear to do the right thing at the right time. But sometimes when you're doing the right thing at the right time, you're standing there all alone. Nobody's standing beside you. Nobody's standing with you to give you courage. You're right there by yourself. Esther sends a message back. Mordecai, you don't understand what you're asking of me. You want me to go see the king, but if he doesn't lower the scepter, I will be dead before the last word comes out of my mouth. She's not saying no. She never said no to her cousin Mordecai. Those words never came out of her mouth. But what she does say is that I need a minute to count the cost. You don't understand what this is going to cost. You don't understand what you're asking of me. You don't understand what the implications of this might be. I need a minute to process all of this. Mordecai gives a very famous response to her word that she needs time to process it. He says this, do not think that because you are in the king's house, that you alone of the Jewish people will survive. In other words, sister, if I go down, you go down. If you think all of the Jewish people out here are going to die and you're going to keep living a life of luxury as the queen, you are sadly mistaken. So you hear me and hear me well. You take your time. You process what needs to process. You think clearly about it. But know this, you are among us. You are of Jewish heritage. You are the same people as me. When they come after me, they will come after you. Now, that would take anybody aback. She knows that there's no escaping this, that one way or the other, either she tries to save her people and maybe goes down with them, or she keeps her mouth shut and enjoys the life as a queen for maybe another 2 weeks and then goes down. But either way, there's not an avenue that she can now see where she has a clear path out of this mess. Mordecai makes a few appeals to Esther. The first one was based on her nationality. Esther, you may be queen, but underneath all of that queenly regalia that you wear every day, underneath all of that beats a Jewish heart. You are us. You are of our tribe. You're our people. You are a Jew. Once the killing starts, it's going to be hard to stop. They may start killing the poor Jews first and the Jews in the outer provinces first, but eventually they're going to find out that you are also Jewish. When they do, the fact that you are queen is not going to make a difference because there will be blood in their eyes. The king will be in an impossible position. He'll have to let you go. You may be the last one to die, but make no mistake, you will die. The second appeal is based on the hidden providence of God. Esther, if you don't come and help us, relief and deliverance will come from another place. Now, that's one of the most amazing statements in all of the Old Testament. That is a reference to the hidden hand of God Almighty in human history. Esther, God has raised you up to save us. You are where you are for such a time as this. But if you don't have the courage, if you let us down, our God reigns and God will deliver us. God will in no way let his people ever be exterminated. Mordecai knows this is true. He knew that even if Esther failed, thousands might be slaughtered, but a remnant would certainly remain. The third appeal is based upon her sense of destiny. Esther, who knows that you have come to this high office for such a time as this? All that has happened to you has been arranged by God so that he could put you right here, so that in this shining moment in history, you can save your people. Esther is now Samson stood between the pillars. She is Noah putting the last stake in the ark. She is Moses standing at the edge of the Red Sea. She is David standing there looking up at Goliath with nothing but a sling and a pebble in his hand. She is now at her defining moment as a child of God. She is standing there. It is her time to shine. Is she gonna shine? Or is she going to take her chances? Esther has been given the entire line now by Mordecai. That brings me to the fourth point. Here's the question. Am I willing to do God's will regardless of the cost? Are we willing to do God's will regardless of the cost? It's a big question. What does this ancient story teach us about overcoming our own fear and future? What does it teach us about serving the Lord regardless of the personal cost? For one thing, we learn that there is no safety in this world. Any sense of safety that we feel is just a facade. It's just something that we have put blinders on for a time, and we feel like we're safe, therefore we are safe. We feel fine until we go to the doctor for the checkout, and the doctor pulls you in a side room and says, "We need to talk." And all of a sudden, we don't feel so fine anymore. Okay? We have a sense of feeling secure and safe, but it is a facade. It's how we get through life without feeling anxiety every waking moment of every day. We convince ourselves that everything is good, everything is fine, everything must be good. Because I feel okay. My car started, I made it to work, everything's good. Bad things happen to really good people all the time. Do you understand that? Bad things happen to really, really good people all the time. Sometimes they appear to be random acts of tragedy. Sometimes they are the result of someone else's incompetence. Sometimes they are because we just end up in what we perceive to be the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. But whatever it is, random acts of tragedy happen. We also learn, based on this story, that there are no coincidences in life. There's no such thing as a coincidence There is the providence of God. God has a plan, and God's hand is always at work, moving us where we need to be, moving others where they need to be, and bringing those to converge together at just the right time and space so that God's will can be accomplished. But there is no such thing as coincidence or happenstance or what we call as random chance. Everything happens because God has caused it or that God has allowed it to happen. You probably aren't a queen in a foreign land, but wherever you are right now, God's hand is on you and putting you where He wants you to be. That's an amazing thing if you let yourself think about it. Your highest calling in life is to use your life and support the cause of Christ in this world. Wherever you are, whatever you do, whatever situation you're in yourself, God expects you to use your life, your finances, your power, your prestige, your position, whatever you are, whoever you are, whatever you have, to be used for the glory of God so that the world might come to know Him. That's why you exist, to serve the Lord. Sometimes we have to do what Esther did. Esther sends word out. Everybody, the whole nation of the Jewish people, begin to fast for me for 3 days. No food, no water. Just refrain from everything. Don't take anything. Just fast and pray. Fast and pray. You see, there's God at work again. He's not mentioned by name. She doesn't say, so that God will get me through this. She says, fast and pray. Fast and pray. She's saying, ask God to intervene. I'm about to do something that could alter human history. Esther has made her decision. And not only has she made a decision, but she has a sense of power in her right now. Have you ever noticed that once you really make up your mind, nothing can deter you from it? Have you ever noticed that? Like we might toil and toss around over a certain big decision, but once you decide this is the decision I'm going to make, this is the direction I'm going to go, and you really set your mind to it, you really come to a point where this is what I'm going to do no matter the cost, that gives you a real sense of boldness. Esther is so bold at this moment, she just says, if I perish, then I perish. Whatever the cost, I'm going to do what needs to be done. Those are solemn words of faith spoken by a woman who is one of God's great heroes in the Bible. She put her life squarely 100% in God's hands. No one, listen, you and I don't know for certainty what the future brings, do we? We really don't. We don't know. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know what tomorrow holds. We don't know what next week, next month, next year holds for any of us. We don't know. Every day above ground is a gift from God, and it should be viewed that way. No one can say what the future will bring. None of us knows if when our days are numbered and they finally come up. But that thought should not alarm us in any way. To all of our fears, the Lord just simply says, fear not. Fear not. You know, more than 15 years ago, I began writing a series of sermons that I've never preached. And the title of it I call Fear Factor. Over and over throughout the Bible, when an angel of the Lord appears to someone, the very first thing they say, fear not. When something terrible is going to happen, fear not. When something great is on the verge of something, fear not. When they're getting ready to conquer a land, fear not. Over and over throughout the Old and New Testament, God speaks to His people and He says, fear not. That's what God is saying to us. Fear not. That's what God's saying to you today, whatever decision you have coming along. What if things get worse? Fear not. What if I lose my health? Fear not. Will I get cancer? Fear not. Will I keep my job? Fear not. Will my loved ones struggle? Fear not. Will my investments, are they going to collapse? Fear not. Am I going to run out of money this year? Fear not. What if tragedy strikes my family? Fear not. Will my children disappoint me? Fear not. Will others ridicule my faith if I stand up for the Lord? Fear not. Will my plans come to nothing? Fear not. What if my dreams turn to ashes? Fear not. What if I face death this year? Fear not. Listen, any of those things can and might indeed happen to any of us sitting here this morning. Death is not a respecter of any person. It comes to the rich, the poor, the successful, the struggling. Death hits all of our doors equally. We don't know what it holds, but I do know what the Word of God says. It says, fear not. Fear not. Fear not. Take hope. Believe that God is in control. Do you believe that today? Do you believe that God is in control? Because He is. Mordecai made his appeal. Esther answers with these stirring words, "Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or nights. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done," this is in verse number 16, "as this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." If the king didn't lower his scepter, she was going to die. There was no question about it. She just knew that it was God's will that she took this next step. She knew it. She had a certainty in her spirit. This is what you're supposed to do. And she did it. This touches on some of the major issues of our lives. We see faith acting in spite of doubt. She wasn't sure. She had no guarantees that she would ever walk out of that room that day. None whatsoever. But she was going to see the king anyway. Again, we see with God's will, when God's will is revealed to those who choose to do it, that God does some miraculous things. Listen, David's pebble did not kill Goliath. God killed Goliath. You think David thought his little sling and that little rock was what brought Goliath down? No, he knew God did that. If God was with him, nothing could stand against him. Do you think for a moment that Moses believed that he parted the Red Sea? No, he knew it was the hand of God that did it. Do you think Samson thought, "Whoa, yeah, I ate my Wheaties this morning, let's do this thing"? No, he knew God was moving those pillars. All of these heroes of the Bible, they knew it was not on their strength. They knew God was doing it. They were following the will of God for their life, and God wrought miracles as a result. There is no stopping a child of God when they are living inside of God's will for their life and acting accordingly to it. There's no stopping you. There's no stopping what God is doing. Sometimes God will clearly reveal His will to you. Other times, God will only do it in progression. As you act by faith, God will move. As you act by faith, God will move. As you act by faith, God will move. Every step of the way, God progressively reveals His will in your life. Sometimes it's just like, and God just reveals it, and you think, wow, that's awesome. I'm going to go that way. But sometimes it's not so easy. Sometimes we say, Lord, if you just show me the big picture, then I'm willing to do it. And God says, no, you be willing first, and then I'll show you one little scene of a great big movie in front of you. You see, what I learned from this story and so many others is this: God doesn't make deals with anybody. You're not going to barter with God. You're not going to say, oh, God, listen, you do this for me, then I'll do that for you. God doesn't barter with anybody. God doesn't cut deals with anybody. Our job is to simply understand and discern the will of God and say, yes, Lord. Yes. Yes, Lord. Wherever you lead, I'll go. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do. Whatever I have to say, I'll say it. Whatever I need to be involved with, I'll be involved with. Lord, however you lead me, I'm willing to do it. You see, God has but one great purpose for you. That is to bring you to the place in your life where you are willing to say, Lord, I'm willing to do your will without regard of the consequences. Lord, I'm willing to do your will regardless of the consequences. And when you say that, in spite of your doubts, then you will know the will of God, and you will do it with the same boldness that Esther did it. If I die, then I die. Let's pray together.